Our scripture reading this morning comes again from the Gospel of Matthew, and we're continuing the story that we've shared a few of the other parables. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus has arrived in Jerusalem in the final week of his life before he's arrested and then tried. And these are some of the discussions, if you will, that he's had with religious leaders, and this kind of wraps up their testing of him, if you will. When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Now while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them this question: "What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he?" They said to him, "The son of David." So he said to them, "How is it then that David by the Spirit calls him Lord, saying, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I put your enemies under your feet'? If David thus calls him Lord, how can he be his son?" No one was able to give him an answer, nor from that day did anyone dare to ask him any more questions. The word of God for the people of God. May the Spirit add a blessing to our understanding.
In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is asked the question, "Which is the greatest commandment?" He answered, "Love God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your mind. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." And then again, at the Last Supper, he says the same thing, but with a twist. "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this all people will know that you are my disciples." This time, Jesus replaced "your neighbor" with "one another." This new love that Christ commands of us goes much deeper than the Old Testament commandment he was quoting in Matthew. The people we have been commanded to love has expanded beyond our neighborhoods to include, well, everyone. And this includes people who might make this commandment a bit difficult, like that confrontational coworker who just seems impossible to get along with, or your in-laws who've never treated you like a part of the family, or maybe the person you just met, who you don't even know and really need some help. You see, Jesus knew his physical time on earth was nearing an end. So in this new take on the old commandment, Jesus also made another change. The words "as yourself" became "as I have loved you." Wow, that's a tough act to follow. Christ's sacrificial life provides a clear and concrete example of real and true love. And he put this love on display on a daily basis with his disciples. He was patient with them, speaking kindly, and showing great concern for their welfare. He instructed, counseled, and comforted them, praying with them and for them. He admonished them for wrongdoing, and yet compassionately bore with their failings. And most of all, he gave his life, dying so that they, and we, might live. According to Jesus, this is how others will know that you are one of his followers. Not because you have a shirt or a bumper sticker that says so. Not because we announce it from a stage or a blog or a status update. But because they look at you, at how you live, the things you do and say, and they see Jesus. They see love.
When we were on vacation, I made an announcement that made me the most popular person in the group, and that was that I wanted to go to church on Sunday. I don't get a chance to sit in worship very often, just to be part of worship, so I thought this is a great chance for me to go. I said, "You don't have to go with me," but it's kind of hard when a person says, "I'm going to church, are you going?" Nope, nope, nope. So everyone else either wanted to go or felt guilty enough that they all went with me. But it was a Pentecostal church, so I've been working on my hand motions. I made a few amens, and am I saying it right? And it was a neat worship service. It was a giant church, and it was cool to go there and just kind of be part of the experience and soak it in. I don't have the hair that the pastor had, but I'm working on it. I don't quite have the fervor that he had preached with either, but it was good. But it also got me to thinking, because there was a part of the sermon that I did not agree with. I just kind of threw it out there and blew past it. I thought, wow, that was kind of out of nowhere he brought that in. But it got me thinking about sermons that I do and what we do here. And then when I saw this scripture verse that was picked, lectionary, and we kind of have been following Jesus along, I thought, this is an opportunity maybe to share a difficult teaching. It doesn't sound difficult, really. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself, or love others as I have loved you. But if you think about it, it might be almost impossible. And we don't necessarily do a great job of it. First, a little context of the passage that we have. This is another small part of a conversation that Jesus is having with the religious authorities of the day. It's like kind of taking a look at a family argument. If you have to remember, this is not Christianity versus Judaism at this time. It never was, and it never should be. Although many of these parables that we have been talking about have made it kind of an us versus them thing. This is like a family fight. Jesus and the authorities discussing which direction their religion is going to take. So in the first day, Jesus arrives in Jerusalem and he goes to the temple and he turns over the money tables and kind of confronts them about the evil practices that they have there. And then the people push back. They want to know why. What authority are you doing all of this? Jesus answers and he continues to provoke with that parable about two sons, and then the parable about the wicked tenants that were watching over the vineyard. Remember we talked about that one, and the owner sent his son and his helpers to collect the money and they killed him. And the parable about the wedding banquet, where no one answered the invitation, and then eventually the king went out and destroyed the town and invited other people in. Well, then the religious authorities keep testing him. They ask him about taxes, about the resurrection, and then finally we get this question about the greatest commandment. And of course, Jesus seems to win each engagement, and people are amazed at his teaching, his knowledge, and the way he answers. But Jesus closes kind of the argument, if you will, with his own question. That kind of question at the end where he asks about the Messiah and asks him about if he comes from David or from the Lord, which is really kind of understand unless you're really dig into it theologically, but safe to say it ends the discussion. Jesus knows what he's talking about. He's a faithful Jew. He knows all about it. He has the authority to talk about this, and they don't question him anymore. He kind of passes their test. Doesn't mean they're happy with him, because eventually they have him arrested and killed anyway. But he kind of sets himself up as, I know what I'm talking about. Well, the story we get today, the Pharisees are a step up. The other group, the Sadducees, have kind of been bested. They don't have much to do. And the Pharisees say, all right, we're going to send in our big gun. This lawyer, we're going to ask him, what is the greatest commandment? So they had set up 613 rules that people had to follow in order to be faithful. Out of the 10 commandments that Moses had originally given them, they had expanded that to 613. We've talked about that before, about how far you can walk on the Sabbath before you're actually working, to how you have to wash yourself before you eat, foods you can eat, all kinds of rules. So they wanted you to say, well, which one is most important? Kind of to trap them, if you will. But Jesus gives an obvious answer. He quotes from the Old Testament. In Leviticus and Deuteronomy. This idea of loving God with your whole self and loving your neighbor as yourself is nothing new. In fact, it is written in the Old Testament. So Jesus says the greatest commandment is love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. Well, he could have ended with that first one. Love God with your heart, mind, and soul. Because that would probably accomplish and cover almost everything, right? If we love God with all ourselves, that would help us to keep all the commandments. But he adds, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, it's easy to love a neighbor who shares your values, believes what you believe, lives the way we think, and thinks, or lives the way we live and thinks the way we think. But that's not where Jesus leaves it. Because when we hear that, when I hear that, a lot of times my first reaction is, well, what boundaries can I place around the neighbor? Which of God's children live on the other side of those boundaries? What kind of walls do I have to build to defend myself from loving them? Certainly God didn't mean for us to love those people, right? Well, Jesus goes on in Matthew chapter 25 and says we should love the least among us, the stranger. And that we'll be judged by whether we are able to see him, that is Jesus, in every single person we encounter. And that we're judged on by what we do, not necessarily what we feel. We confuse love a lot with anything. We've talked about love before, where I can say I love a good cheeseburger. I love to watch the Vikings. Right? I love my wife. I love God. We kind of throw that word around all the same. Love here is not a warm, fuzzy feeling. Love here, what Jesus talks about, is defined by actions. What do you do? That shows if you love or not. In fact, in Luke's version of this story, the Pharisees asked the question, well, Jesus, who is my neighbor? They wanted a definition of it. What do you mean by neighbor? And then Luke does the story with the Good Samaritan, right? There once was a man walking down the road to Jericho, and he was beaten up, and they were left there to die. And of course, we had the story of the Samaritan who stopped to help the person. The people who are neighbors are the people who are beaten up. The poor, the maimed, the blind, the lame. Or in our world today, the poor, addicted to drugs, starving, hungry. Those in jail, prisons, those are sick, they're homeless. Who is my neighbor is not my family, friends, or the people next door, but those who are beaten up by life. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus teaches us that our neighbors are not just the people who live next door, or share our values and our perspectives, or even our religion. That's why Jesus made the Samaritan, the one who did not share the values or the lifestyle, even the religion of the Jewish people of the day, the hero of the story. Our neighbor, according to Jesus, is not the person who agrees with us, or the person we may agree with. Our neighbor is anyone who is in need. Jesus put it in a different way. He says it is obviously you are unable to love someone that you believe is beneath you. So Jesus says, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. When we hear the word neighbor, I think we obviously we sometimes substitute the word family. We are to love God with all our heart, mind, and soul, and our family as ourselves. Our mom and dad, our brother and sister, grandma and grandpa. We're to be filled with love for them. But Jesus says even the Pharisees loved their children and their parents. Sometimes we think we love our neighbors like our friends. Our friends at church, our friends at school, or our friends at work. Or we think that we love our neighbors, love the people next door. The people in the house or the acreage or the apartment next to us who drive the same kind of cars, wear the same kind of clothes as we do. We're supposed to love them as ourselves. But Jesus does not let us stay there. He says, love your neighbors as yourself. He defines neighbors as everyone. More specifically, he defines neighbors as people who need our help. People who don't or can't experience the same kind of freedoms, the same kind of privilege, the same kind of lifestyle that we have. That love is not just a warm, fuzzy feeling. One author quotes it as a stubborn commitment to love which rescues us from our shortcomings. The author goes on to say, in an age when the word love is greatly abused, it is important to remember that the primary component of biblical love is not affection, but commitment. Warm feelings of gratitude may fill our consciousness as we consider all that God has done for us. But it is not warm feelings that Jesus demands of us, but stubborn, unwavering commitment. Love is defined by what we do. It's not a theory. It's not a paper commitment. It's concrete, on the ground, stubborn, unwavering work. Love would be talking to a woman in full Muslim garb who has her child on the beach or walking down the road. Engaging with that guest at church who smells, or the one who is very loud and offers commentary on all of the sermon or anything that's going on. It's being civil with family we'd probably rather disown. It's maybe voting against our best interest. It takes a lesson from Luke that our neighbor is whoever we are with, but doesn't condemn even the priests or the Pharisees. There's a story told by a rabbi that shows us what it means to love. He goes, as the account goes, the rabbi had announced to his disciples, I have learned how we must truly love our neighbor from a conversation between two villagers which I overheard. The first villager said, tell me, friend, do you love me? The second says, I love you deeply. The first, well, do you know, my friend, what gives me pain? The second says, how can I, pray, know what gives you pain? The first villager responds, if you do not know what gives me pain, how can you say that you truly love me? The rabbi closes and says, to truly love means to know what brings pain to your friends, or to know what brings pain to your neighbors. Love confesses that we don't always know or care what brings pain to others. This verse, in fact, these chapters from Matthew should have us all kind of squirming in our pews, because we are the Pharisees. We are the Sadducees. We are the religious leaders that Jesus is kind of getting at in these verses. Love God with all your heart, mind, and soul kind of covers false worship, idols, taking God's name in vain, keeping the Sabbath, honoring your parents. The final quote, love the neighbors as yourself, covers the rest of them. So, as I was doing this sermon and as I was thinking, that's all nice in theory. It's all nice to stand there or sit out there and hear that I should love my neighbor and maybe I should be challenged on who my neighbor is. But what about when it gets down to the brass tacks? I want to land this plane in this sermon. It's a quote I heard from that pastor, which is a great one. I'm going to land it for you. What does it mean for us to actually love our neighbors? What would that look like? Well, I'll tell you where I was convicted. Part of it was, it's hard to write the closing part to this sermon. One, because it's challenging to me. Two, because it ends up being challenging to all of us. And three, there's a good chance you may not agree with everything I talk about. And I like to be liked. Right? Don't we all like to be liked? But as I listened to that pastor and what he said, and I didn't agree with what he said, which is fine. I'm not supposed to agree with everything he says. I thought, how many times have I stood up here and said something where someone might say, ooh, I don't know if I agree with that. So I was convicted to think, you know what? This passage is supposed to make us uncomfortable. It's supposed to make us think outside of the box. And so when we are to love our neighbor, we are to remember that we need to find ways to love. Think about if you met a person, and if their first response to you was, here are the rules you need to follow in order to be part of my team. What would your response be to that person? Not real welcoming. What if that person's first response was, come join me. How can I help you? Where can I make your life easier? If they showed you love. See, Christianity has gotten to the point where it's too much of, follow these rules first, don't do this, don't be this, then you can be a Christian, instead of just loving, welcoming, and then maybe letting Jesus worry about the transformation part. We're finding ways in this country to keep people out. Right? In the name of safety. Instead of inviting people in to share what we have. We're also finding ways now in this country to keep people from experiencing the same kind of freedoms we have. Simply because of their sexual orientation. Maybe the color of their skin. Maybe where they were born. Maybe the religion that they have. We're finding ways to keep them or exclude them or not let them have the same opportunities that we have. We're finding ways not to love, instead of finding more ways to love and to welcome. It's become so much of an us versus them. I'm right, you're wrong. It's hard to even have a discussion where we can hear another side. We have 33 kids at Tri-Center that participate in our weekend backpack program. That's probably a tip of the iceberg of people in the area that are hungry, wondering where their next food comes from. Can we solve world hunger? Probably not. Can we maybe find ways that we have less people in our neighborhood that are hungry? I'm sure. We're real good at putting people down on social media or in our own little circle, talking about those other people, instead of finding ways to build them up. We forget that Jesus started with love and compassion, and then worried about the transformation. We worry first that they're not like us. They might take something from us. We might have to give something up in order for them to get something. We become very protective when we think about giving ourselves up. We don't put ourselves in their position. They go, well, maybe they want to be helped or loved or have the same kind of chances that we had. I think that's what God said, or Jesus said, when he said, love others as yourself. You want them to have the same experience of God. I want them to have the same chances that you had. And that might mean putting some of your stuff behind. That might be opening up in love and then letting Jesus worry about the transformation. Maybe God is asking us to speak up a little bit more, instead of sitting by quietly when things happen that we don't agree with. Maybe God is asking us to give a little bit more of our time, of our energy, of helping in the area. I don't know what God is truly asking us and all of us to do, but I know God is judging us by what we do, not by just what we say. Let our actions be shown of love. Let our actions be loving. Amen.